and you're called a conspiracy theory nutcase because you never see this. You only hear the platitudes. You only see the stuff that's reasonable. You only see like the George Floyd videos that inflame your passions, no matter who you are and what your politics are, because that's a human being who's literally dying in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you see. If you would take a step back and look at that, you would go, I don't know that we want to be associated with these people. I don't know that what they're pushing is actually what they're saying.
Well, this is one of the strategies, the activist strategies, is they use the Mott and Bailey argument. Uh, the words Black Lives Matter is the Mott. It's easily defensible. Yes, Black Lives Matter. Of course, your life matters. It's this is not a debatable topic unless I'm either evil or a sociopath.
Yeah.
Yes, Black Lives Matter. Easily defensible. Then you jump out into the Mott. Oh, we want to destroy the nuclear family. Wait, what? Oh, retreat back to the, or excuse me, jump out into Bailey and then retreat back to the Mott. You said Black Lives Matter. Well, yeah, they do. Well, let's do this. No, 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 no. Same thing we saw with Dr. Seuss in the cancel culture. It's like, oh, racism is bad. Well, yeah, racism is bad. Cancel Dr. Seuss. What? You said racism is bad. Here's one example. That's kind of pushing it, but you said racism is bad. You don't want to be seen as a racist, do you?
Right.
No, 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 I'm not. That's a pretty big charge. Okay, we'll go along with it. So there's two parts to the Dr. Seuss. And this is part of the deception. This is part of the activism. And this is my big problem with the Dr. Seuss thing and all the cancel culture. Is the first part is the concept creep we talked about, the ever expanding definitions of the words harm. Dr. Seuss says harmful is why they removed it, or those 5 books, it harms people, and the expanding definition of what is racist, or what do we say is actually racism. Whereas those were just depictions that were perfectly acceptable during the time he wrote them. We've evolved from then. He evolved after that, and no longer would that be acceptable now. That's fine. We can look back at that and say, here's a good story with a moral in it, but also here's another moral. Here's another, look at what he could draw back then without getting in trouble. But look at the way things are now, we're much more accepting. Look how far we've gone. People are afraid to look how far we've gone because that takes away from the argument of let's tear everything down. And so the second thing that's dangerous here is when you start seeing it as actual activism versus compassion. If you're one of the compassionate in those groups, you see it as actual activism. There's a purpose to why they pick Dr. Seuss, and just doing it in general. They're picking the things you love, that Americans love, on purpose, and the more ridiculous, the better, because the more people you're going to get fired up over. 91% of the US says, why are you doing this? Now the activists can say, look, America's systemically racist because they want to protect this racist thing. So that's the Bailey, racism, or the Mott. I keep getting these backwards. That's the Mott, is the racism. Then they go out into the Bailey again, make another attack. And when you push them back to the Mott, to the safe home, you're all racist. Why'd you attack that? You attacked me. Kaepernick was the same.
Yep.
Protest American flag, systemic racism. No, you offended a lot of people. Well, that's because they're racist. There's a big ultimate, when we're looking at where all these activists are going down these roads, there's an ultimate goal that doesn't look, that is actually a very, very, very bad thing. And we start seeing it in the legislation that's coming up. What's the narrative for the last 10 years? The ultimate narrative. with racism, the systemic stuff. What's the ultimate narrative?
I'm curious where you're going with this, but my thought is that
Why is America bad?
the because America was founded on evil, and therefore all of the structures, the systems that were founded by the founders need to be torn down, need to be ignored or torn down so we can put totally new ones in place to make things equitable and fair.
What is being touted as the biggest threat to the United States?
Right now, it's white supremacy and insurrection.
White supremacist, domestic terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest threat. That's the ultimate narrative. But we also have the ever expanding definition of what it is to be a white supremacist, including multi-ethnic white supremacists or multicultural white supremacists.
I haven't heard that one.
What they're saying, black people that are conservative.
So this is how you call Steele a racist.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's this is USA Today. This is mainstream media. This isn't some fly-by-night random person or even a BLM organizer. Multi-ethnic white supremacist. That's what because that's how they're coming after the Proud Boys, because they're founded by a Cuban black man and all kinds of stuff like that. So the ever-expanding definition of white supremacy, the ever-expanding definition of harm, the ever-expanding definition of racism is leading down the path to where at some point, people like us, or people like Granny, who just wants to live her life and be nice to everybody, is a domestic terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got domestic terrorism bills that are trying to be passed on the floor. And I think it first came up in 2016, but they re-brought it back after the January 6th stuff, where it's basically Patriot Act 2.0 on steroids, but for quote unquote domestic white supremacist terrorism. And somebody said, "Oh, that's 2016. You're just bringing something back up." I read the thing, and on the list of examples was Kyle Rittenhouse. Unless we got some prophets in our Congress in 2016, that thing's been re-upped.
Yeah. And lest you think we go too far, that reminds me of the other thing from that Jordan Peterson interview that jumped out at me is he was talking about the examples of, basically cancel culture and things like that was already happening in 2018. And the journalist was guffawing that he was being an extremist. And one of the points he made was, people being jailed for jokes. And she laughed and said, "Are you serious?" And he looked at her and said, "It's literally already happened." And so what he was referring to, and he talked about, was this YouTuber who went by the name Count Dankula. And he was in Great Britain. I think he was in Scotland. And his girlfriend had this pug that he hated. He did not like this dog. And so he thought it would be funny if he taught this dog to do a Nazi salute. And he was literally put in jail. I don't remember if it was for hate speech or what the exact violation was they got him, but it was a joke. You can think it wasn't funny. You can think it was in poor taste. You can think it was dumb, but it was a joke, teaching a dog to do a Nazi salute. And this guy was put in jail in Britain, not in some third world hellhole for making a joke. And the journalist, her reaction was really chilling, because she went, "Well," and basically it boiled down to, "Well, I didn't think it was meant in fun. I didn't think it was a joke. So you get to decide what is or isn't a joke. So based on your idea of what is in good taste, You can send people to jail. I mean, that's what we're headed for. That's what, not what we're headed for. That's what we're doing.
Mhm.
And now you're passing a bill that adds all sorts of teeth to this authoritarian idea.
Well, yeah, couple that with a lot of things. They're like, we should rethink freedom of speech. Couple that with calls for rethinking the Second Amendment. This is not a doom and gloom. This is just I think, a pretty factual statement. When it comes to
Yeah.
the American people, mess with their free speech, you're going to get a lot of complaining. Start taking away their guns, they're going to start shooting.
Yep. Yep. And I have a a good historical example for this, since we are talking about racial issues. Okay, so as I mentioned before, one of the things that annoys me about the postmodernist philosophy and all of its various tentacles, it's nothing new. Um, there were people who were actually on the side of good, who thought America was founded on evil and it needed to be destroyed. Um, One of the more prominent ones was a guy named William Lloyd Garrison, who was one of the most vocal leaders of the abolitionist movement of the mid 1800s. And like a lot of abolitionists at the time, he thought the problem was the U.S. Constitution. He thought the U.S. Constitution needed to be, basically amended so much you might as well throw it out, because the U.S. Constitution is what was facilitating the evil of slavery. So much so that in one of his more infamous public speeches, actually, I think he did this on more than one occasion, he would take a copy of the U.S. Constitution and burn it. In much the same way that 60s radicals burnt the U.S. flag. Um, well, one of the greatest Americans to ever live, I think, was Frederick Douglass, and he was basically taught by William Lloyd Garrison when he first escaped to freedom and rose to prominence, and became a mover in the abolitionist movement. But then he got to reading and thinking on his own, and he realized that actually, no, the Constitution doesn't protect slavery. It's one, it's silent on the question, and two, uh, all people, white or black, needed those structures and those founding principles of liberty and equality in order to protect them, in order to secure their natural rights. So that if you throw out the Constitution, you leave everybody open to injustice, not just the black men who were enslaved. And he made a lot of great points on the subject. If you go to there's a Frederick Douglass Foundation, and they've got a lot of his writings online, and that's basically what the Lincoln Douglas debates were about, which most people know the names, but they haven't actually read. Basically, Lincoln's point was, no, the Constitution didn't protect slavery, and that was the problem with the Fugitive Slave Act and the Dred Scott decision, is it imposed slavery essentially on free states. It took it out of the South and imposed it everywhere because of those acts. And as we've kind of talked about, the 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 whole course of human history basically has been uh, violence and horribleness, and that was the point of the founders. If you go back and you read their debates, there weren't really stringent disagreements between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists and the various camps of thought around the founding. They were all focused on what is the best way to ensure that what has always happened through human history doesn't happen here. That's the point of our founding documents, and why they are necessary, and why we ignore them or destroy them at our own peril.
Yeah, and the American experiment, just keep repeating it. It was set up in a way to to create an environment where normal human tendencies have trouble manifesting in an authoritarian way. You talk about socialization. If these movements are successful, one of the naughty words we talked about with Kendi was assimilation. If these movements are successful, everyone's going to have to assimilate because everything will be so different. That's part of the point on the activists is they want everybody to be on a level playing field, even if the playing field is running through sand, so everyone's quote unquote equal. But the problem is, as we alluded to earlier, the powerful people, the people with influence, the people with resources will take control. And I think, again, I think we'll end up with a bigger gap than we have now. Now, we do need to be working on that gap. That's the, I mean, 10 years ago, that was the idea. We need to be working on that gap and continuing to improve. Like I brought up the crime numbers, we need to keep working on that. Incarceration rates, we need to keep working on that. And they're slow processes. Most people incarcerated, we brought up the war on drugs, but realistically, most people incarcerated are for violent crimes. They have longer sentences. And so when you have a longer sentence, you make improvements over time. Well, that improvement in the jails, in the prison systems can go down slower because some people from a time before are still there. So we have to give some things time. Now, I am more optimistic than a lot of people are on the timeline for reversing this course because it happened so fast. It was like a flash fire. We could put it out in a lot of ways. Now there's going to be some healing from it. There's going to be some repair from it, but I think the initial changes could be relatively quick. And unfortunately, as a country, we need, we've been poked along for a long time, and a certain community has been poked for a long time in a big way. And it's got to be some sort of kind of nationwide cognitive behavioral psychology, cognitive behavioral change, where you expose yourself to the idea of something different. So when we talk about the Black community, we have about 2 generations that probably need to check their unconscious mind on what they feel. Like, what is a microaggression? That person looked at me funny. Automatically, I'm triggered. Well, they've been conditioned to do that for a long time. That cop pulled me over and he moved a little fast. You have to take a step back and cognitively start training yourself. But at the same time, the second part of that is teaching your children that it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, hey, look how great things are. You're in the greatest country in the world to be Black, if you really think about it. I'll look up that quote later, but it was a quote on how to retrain your unconscious mind from a neurobiology standpoint, and it's all from the prefrontal cortex. You have to take a step back and think things through again and again and again, and slowly expose yourself to the opposite of what you want to react to. So I lost my train of thought on that because I was thinking about that quote.